everyone, and I just would like to extend a very warm welcome to everybody joining us for our EWT Wild Chat this evening. I'm Angela Cherrington. I'm going to be your facilitator for this evening, and it's really such a great pleasure to spend the evening with you. In this month of August, as our country celebrates Women's Day and Women's Month, we really do have the rare opportunity to each sit back and reflect on our experiences, on where we are in our personal or professional lives, in our personal or professional journey. And we definitely see the spotlight in this month on both the challenges and the successes of other women. And we also get the opportunity to really take inspiration from a number of leading ladies and inspirational women in leadership positions. And that's really our theme for this evening's Wild Chat. But I do want to say that tonight's discussion is not just for ladies and for the fairer sex. We welcome the views of the gents on the webinar with us. We welcome diverse conversation, and it's not a one-sided conversation. And I think what better way to reflect on these conversations and challenges and successes and lessons learned and with our fantastic panel tonight. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Helen Turnbull joining us. Helen, welcome. Helen is the CEO of the Cape Leopard Trust, and it's a great pleasure to have you on the call with us today. We've got Deidre Herbst. Deidre, welcome. Deidre is the Environmental Manager at Eskom. We've got Tanya dos Santos. Welcome to you too, Global Head of Sustainability at Investec. And of course, we have our own EWT CEO, Yolan Friedmann. Yolan, thank you for making the time to join the conversation this evening. And really, I welcome the insights and the contribution and the conversation. I would like to say that our aim for this evening in the Wild Chat is a relaxed conversation. It's about sharing some of the lessons learned over the past months in this new space we find ourselves in, and even some of the more light-hearted reflections and moments we can look back on with a bit of a smile or a giggle, or perhaps even a blush when we realize some of the silly things we've done, because it's really about looking at all the perspectives. We're going to talk in the context of reflecting on the many hats women wear in our roles as leaders, as business owners, as daughters, mothers, sisters, partners, caregivers in this difficult time, and certainly for those of you who have had to put on your teaching hats in this difficult time of COVID-19. So I'd like to just remind our audience that you have the opportunity to pose questions to any of the panelists, or to even make some comments through the Q&A function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen. I think we're also used to this virtual engagement and Zoom webinars. The saying of the year is certainly going to be "you're on mute," and I think that's something we're always going to reflect on going forward. So I think let's jump straight into the conversation, because we have about 45 minutes. And Helen, I'm going to start with you, and I'm going to ask you perhaps to share some of your thoughts, and each of you will get the opportunity. But what has been most challenging for you in this new space and in this time of COVID and in this really strange reality over the last 5 months? I'm going to hand the mic to you.
Can you hear me now, Angela? Okay, great. Well, a warm good evening to you and to all the ladies and all the gentlemen listening this evening. I guess the first thing we've had to all get used to wearing many hats is this. So So yeah, getting used to wearing the leopard mask has been quite something. And yeah, it's been quite an interesting time, I have to say. I think mainly from the perspective of watching the global scene unfold, and knowing that at some stage it would come to South Africa, that we have COVID-19 in our midst, and basically finding ourselves in the unknown, very much blindsided by the whole virus and how it unfolded. I think from the point of view of being involved in an organisation like I am in conservation, maintaining a sense of stability in our team has been one of the most important things that has been a challenge. Making sure you're there not just as a colleague, but also as a mentor. Some people have found it a little bit of a difficult landscape to get used to, and making sure you're available to speak to everybody and make them feel safe. I think that's been quite a big challenge, just making sure you keep everyone together. And part of that has been getting into the point of view of adapting and innovating. So not sitting on our laurels and looking at the challenge ahead of us, but also seeing that when there is a challenge, there's definitely an opportunity, and not seeing it as something that's negative, but rather trying to change it and say, okay, we've got this ahead of us, but how can we make it better? So for instance, in our organisation, our environmental education component of our work was badly hit, but we didn't waste a single moment before jumping into a lot of online material. And then from there, getting films and education lessons on board, leopard lessons, and even reading a children's book. So really keeping people motivated, and just making sure that, you know, we adapt to a funding landscape that's changing.
Great. Thank you for that, kicking us off on the conversation. Deidre, I'm going to perhaps come to you and ask you the same question. You know, what are some of the challenges you have experienced over the last couple of months?
Unmute. Oh, there you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was
The
muted
saying
for a
of the
bit.
year,
You're
on
muted. You're on mute. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to share with you some of the experiences. I think certainly the one challenge that we all face is communication. And for me, it's much easier being in a room, having difficult conversations with people face to face than doing it virtually. But we've had to become used to that. And I think, as Helen was saying, that it's the biggest challenge is not everybody deals with this virtual kind of environment equally. And what we found is some individuals that you would never imagine needed a lot of company were kind of at home on their own, or only had a daughter at home, and suddenly they found themselves in a situation that they weren't comfortable. So I think it is really about mentoring and coaching, finding how each individual's responding to the challenge. Because in an office, you know how they're responding. You can see it. You can see their body language when they're not coping, or they're taking a little bit of stress, and that's a little bit more difficult when you're doing it all virtually and you're not seeing people face to face every day. So I think that's been the biggest challenge. But certainly, from a personal perspective, I don't have little children anymore, and so I didn't have to do the schooling. But listening to the ladies dealing with little children, dealing with the schooling, and then also trying to work, I take my hat off to them, to dealing with the challenge and being able to cope with the challenges of work and the challenges of raising children. And I think in many cases, the domestic chores, which they hadn't necessarily had to do previously. So yeah, I think those were really the challenges that I found going into lockdown.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Tanya, I'm going to come to you. And as with the other ladies, and you have the opportunity to give us some of your thoughts on what your challenges have been.
Thanks, Angela. Just so you know, it's not your eyesight that's going wrong. If I'm coming across a bit blurred, it's my camera. It's not COVID affecting your optic nerve. So I think, you know, from a team perspective, from a work perspective, we actually adapted pretty quickly to the online world because we've always had a very flexible way of working, and a lot of the team already do work from home and have a lot of that flexibility. But for me personally, I'm a very social person, and not being able to socialize with my team, and even more importantly, not being able to socialize with my family. So I'm very close to my family. We all live close to each other. We spend weekends and have braais. I missed that human and that social connection, certainly in the first few weeks of lockdown. And then you talk about children. So I've got 3 teenagers who haven't needed help for years doing homework or anything. It was absolute bliss. They learned how to get on and do their own thing, completely regressed over lockdown. And I ended up having to actually put time in my diary to sit with them and go through what needs to be done, because they're just not used to this completely different world. So yes, you know, just staying connected with the team. At the same time, I took over a team in the UK. So I'm now trying to connect with people online that I've, you know, I mean, most of them I've met, but they've now, you know, taken on a new role and a new leader. And you need that face-to-face, you need that physical human connection. And then I think for me personally as well is not being able to get to the bush. You know, anyone who knows me knows I'm up in the bush every month, and that's really what feeds my soul. So for me, the biggest challenge was actually not being able to get to the one thing that really, you know, drives my passion and keeps me going.
Great. Thanks for that, Tanya. Yolan, I'm going to hand the mic to you and let you give us some of your thoughts. And then I've perhaps got a couple of questions for each of you as we continue the conversation. So Yolan, you've got the stage, so to speak. We can see you.
Thanks, everyone. I have load shedding in my neighborhood, so I think my connection is very unstable. If people can't hear me, let me know. Might have to just disconnect my video. So I will just expect a message or two if people can't hear me. That's not, it's nothing I can have control over. And I don't want to repeat what everyone has said, because I think we're all experiencing very similar things. But I think the biggest challenge that I think I've been faced with as a CEO of an organization during this time is dealing with fear. And I think that, you know, on the one hand, the EWT is a very, we have a structure that sees our staff in the field most of the time. We have about 70-80% of our staff around the region working in the field anyway. So the fact that we have staff all over the place, and people are used to working remotely, and we have a number of facilities that remote conferencing, that's in place that most people would normally have when you have remote staff. So I think for the majority of us,
Yolan, I think you may need to close your video. I think we've lost Yolan. Okay, well, we'll give Yolan the opportunity to reconnect and re-engage with the conversation. But there's a question on the group for Tanya saying, are you able to go to the bush again?
Well, yes, only in the last couple of days. Yeah. So since we've moved to level 2, so I live in Gauteng, and since we've moved to level 2, we're now able to move across the provinces quite easily. Our place of preference is in the Sabi Sands in Mpumalanga. And yes, that's exactly where I'm going this weekend. Can't wait. So excited.
So I was going to say, I'm surprised you're not calling us from there, and took the opportunity to leave on Tuesday. but while you've got the spotlight, Tanya, perhaps I can ask you, do you think that us not being able to be in a room with individuals when we're having a conversation or a business meeting, and not being able to really judge and see that body language is impacting some of perhaps our decision making when we're having business conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt, especially as women, we're so attuned to every aspect of our senses, visual, hearing, you know, when someone looks away, when you ask them a question, you know, when someone's avoiding you, eye contact. It's definitely critical to developing relationships. So for me, it's actually disconcerting to have online meetings and people turn their videos off, which I know we have to do because it helps cut down on the bandwidth. But you want to see people's reactions. I mean, I'm Portuguese. There I am talking with my hands. That's the real me. Whereas if I'm tight and holding back, you get a sense that the person's not actually revealing their true self. So definitely, this is definitely halting the progression in relationships and discussions.
And Deidre, do you think that we've really embraced the agility in adapting to this, to the surprising news when we realized where we were in this crisis and moving into lockdown, and you know, I think some people embrace the agility and some people are perhaps a little slower. And what are your thoughts on that ability to think on your feet and adapt and quickly change your course of action?
Muted. Okay, there you go. Yeah, I think I was actually pleasantly surprised. I have a team of 25 people, and I think only one really struggled with adapting and agility, but the rest picked it up and ran with it. We were getting more done. I think the productivity in some cases increased significantly. And then we realized also that, you know, a couple of people that live a far distance and struggle a little bit with their health and the work environment, they actually thrived in this situation. They've adapted really well to working from home. And I think what we're going to do going forward is that we would probably have a mixture of office and a little bit more of working from home, because we've realized it's been a learning curve for all of us, especially us oldies that are a bit of stickler on, you know, we need to be at the office, we need to see people, we need to engage. I certainly still feel that way, but this has taught me that you can have a combination of it, and that actually people are very disciplined in a situation where they have to be disciplined, they have to be available, they need to produce. I've certainly seen people being very agile. Of course, I deal with a professional, so a level of professionalism you would expect. I'm not sure that we would get it across society, because not everybody is able to engage through the technology and to be effective with it. So I think different strokes for different folks, but I've been pleasantly surprised at the response.
Thank you. I think Yolan's back with us. Yolan, are you with us? Okay, no, we don't have sound with Yolan yet. So, Helen, I'm going to come to you. And you spoke about maintaining your energy levels and looking after your health, etc. But and really focusing on the well-being of your team. But you know, often we have that outward view. How are you coping with maintaining your own energy levels and staying motivated yourself?
Yeah, no, that takes some doing. You tend to always give your energy to everything that's happening around you, I think. But I have quite a strict regime with keeping up with Pilates, which is a nice discipline. I've been working with Pilates for about 19 years now, and I find that's a really good mind focus, takes me away from work. Walking and getting outside, I think that's important when we were permitted to go outside. Obviously, there was a time when we weren't allowed to go outside except for between 6 and 9 in the morning. But getting out into nature is always important, just feeling that connection again and just getting out of your own environment. And I think also not getting sucked into the negative, because there's so much fake news that goes on around everything with the whole COVID situation, that it's you know, it's very easy to get caught up in the negative without actually compartmentalizing it in a way and just saying, I'm not going to be sucked into that negative side, and rather just try to rise above it. I think you have to do that in a situation like any of us ladies are in. You have to be able to do that to keep your self-care as a priority. And also, I actually looked at it in a different way. I actually thought about how nature must feel, because we found ourselves very much out of our comfort zone with the whole COVID thing. When you look at nature and how nature is all around us, but we continually put down fences, we build houses, we build businesses, high rise, sky rise. I think nature's continually living in a state of unease and confusion, which is totally beyond its control, faced with the human changes that we kind of enforce on the planet. So I've tried to think of it from that perspective, that actually, how does nature feel in our situation? We feel confused and threatened and uncomfortable with things, but it must be far worse for nature, that's trying to survive and just carry on with its normal business as status quo, and can't cross over various landscapes because suddenly there's a fence or a building. I mean, they don't have a voice, so how do they feel about it? So that kind of gives me some grounding to think, you know, we're all connected, and we should actually be thinking about the broader picture when it comes to self-care, not just about ourselves, but beyond ourselves.
I would certainly support that view. And Tanya, perhaps I'll come to you and get some of your thoughts around how are you maintaining your energy levels when you have such a large team and now a team located in different jurisdictions. How are you maintaining your energy and your self-care?
I think to start with, I'm really, really fortunate that Investec has probably one of the best well-being programs in the world, never mind the country. So they provide extensive resources for us to tap into, both from a physical. They have yoga classes you can join. They have psychologists available if you're feeling down. To the extent that our CEO actually recommended that everyone take a day off. I think it was the day between the 16th of June. They actually encouraged and recommended everyone takes that day off because it is so exhausting during lockdown. So from a support perspective, I'm very fortunate. Then the usual, as Helen said, exercising. I was lucky I started with a personal trainer just before lockdown, carried on online with her. And what I started to do was actually turning my camera off, and then I would stand at my desk here and do some squats and do some lunges, and just standing up gave me a little burst of energy. Another thing, stepping outside, and I think we'd all say it. I think all of us will say just that time in nature makes all the difference. So one of my employees was feeling quite depressed the one day, which she isn't normally, and I just said to her, you know what, when we get off this call, go outside. Just lie on the grass, feel the grass, give your staffy a huge big love, look up into the sky, notice the birds, smell the air, smell everything else around you, and gain perspective. So that for me has been the best thing about being at home, because it's not so easy for me to step out the office and do that. And here it's literally a door away. And then spending time with my family, playing tile rummy on the weekend has just brought back perspective. So yeah, lots of things that I just wouldn't ordinarily get to do.
Before I go, give Yolan a chance to finish her thinking, I'm going to quickly pose a question to Deidre. Deidre, Eleanor Mary has said, nature has had a bit of a breather from us, and there's cleaner air, and the animals have been found in suburban context during lockdown. And she's asking, have you not all been a bit energized by the rapid response of nature around us to a quieter world with less traffic on the road and in the air? And Deidre, perhaps you'd like to give us your thoughts on that. You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, cool, thanks. I do think that the environment benefited, certainly from a clean air perspective. All the statistics show that that air was definitely cleaner in Johannesburg around. And, you know, people that live near to the airport, suddenly they just weren't hearing the aeroplanes going over, and how bizarre it was to be in living in Kempton Park and not hearing the aeroplanes go over. So I think it did give everybody a little bit of a breather. I do see around some of the more the power station areas where we've got our power stations, a lot of people seem to go home during that period, and so we were also seeing levels of the lower level pollution much lower than what we would normally experience at that time of year in the winter. So I do think that nature did take a little bit of a breather, but when you go back onto the streets now and the roads, it's all back to the same levels. But perhaps from a research point of view, I think that having seen the difference and where the pollution is coming from and what kind of pollution we are dealing with, we maybe will be able to find some different answers to that. And I also think that there would be some permanent breathing for the environment in terms of less traffic on the roads. I really do think that this is going to change the world that as we know it, that far more people are going to be working from home and not traveling as much. So I'm hoping that this will also lead to a little bit of a greener period where we are actually not polluting as much as we usually do, especially vehicles, etc. And we'll see how that progresses as we go along. But I have to say that this experience and the fear that Yolan started talking about, and hopefully she talks about it a little bit more, is something that everybody experiences. But the nature is one area, but certainly from a social perspective, what I realize is how connected we all are. You know, whether it is the guy that gets a little bit of money from being a car guard, to people that have work in the tourism industry, etc. Everybody was so affected, and you realize how circular the economy is and how everything each individual does impacts on those individuals around them. So to me, that was something that was really significant to see and to feel, even though you kind of know it became a stark reality when we went into lockdown.
Thanks for that, Deidre. I think we're going to grab onto Yolan while we still have connection and take the opportunity. Yolan, we're in your hands.
Thanks, Ange. I've just had to do some network juggling, so let's see if this network has a bit more battery backup. Yeah, what I was going to say is I think one of the biggest challenges I've had was dealing with people's fear and different levels of fear. You know, I think all of us are leaders in our various institutions because we have a skill set that is suited to being a leader in that particular institution. But I think something like a national lockdown and a pandemic draws on leadership skills in areas that perhaps none of us have ever been exposed to or had to confront previously. So the fear of getting ill, you know, suddenly we were exposed to people in the organization who, rightly so, hadn't necessarily declared previous health issues, comorbidities, etc., and we're now coming forward and saying, I've got this problem and I'm particularly scared about getting sick. So you're having to deal with people's fear about their own personal or their own family's personal health. You're also dealing with the fear of people losing their jobs, because that is a reality. We all started this lockdown assuring our staff that there would not be job losses, but you can't do that for too long. You know, no one predicted how long the lockdown would go on for. And our sector has been particularly hard hit because we rely on discretionary income. Last when, you know, charity begins at home. So eventually you have to start being transparent and honest and open with your staff, but you don't want to engender additional fear when people are worried about job losses. When people are worried about the economy, you know, people are worried about you know, all sorts of other fears that you might never have been confronted with as a leader in your organization. You know, I'm quite comfortable talking to people about conservation issues, but we were now confronted with having to develop sets of regulations and health strategies and health and safety policies in an organization, and trying to assure our staff that, you know, we would do the best for them. Now, the EWT on the one hand was very fortunate that most of our staff were working on essential services because we provide critical conservation services. But it also meant that while they were providing those services, they were potentially exposing themselves and their families. So we had to very quickly become, you know, medical experts and consult other medical experts. And so I think as a leader, one is instantly challenged with all sorts of other things you've never confronted in your life. And the truth is, we're also scared because we're also people at home who are confronted with families that are getting ill and, you know, family members who've lost their jobs. So I think that's the one thing. And the other thing which was very clear to me throughout all of this is people crave leadership, and we saw that in the South African population at large, who largely bought into the government's decision to go into an instant and hard lockdown initially. But we also saw how that changed as the lockdown became protracted and increasingly began to look irrational. But it didn't stop the fact that people still crave leadership. You know, people were crowded around radios and TVs and waiting to hear from our government what the answers are. And I think that puts an incredible burden on people in a leadership position, because the truth is none of us have the answers. But I think at the same time, it's been a humbling experience because we've all had to lean on each other and be honest with each other and say, we don't have the answers. We don't know what's going to happen. We can't give you the assurance you want, but we're here and we're listening and we're having conversations and we're going to figure this out together. So I think out of that perhaps comes another level of authentic leadership in all of us that I think is something I'd like to see continue into the future in most of our organizations.
And Yolan, I think to your point, Carmela on the comments says it's really great to hear that other women are feeling similar. There's fear, there's uncertainty, there's even some element of loneliness if you think you're dealing with some of the issues you're dealing with and you're the only one dealing with it. So I think, you know, that comment around being authentic and letting people see that authentic side of us is certainly something that's coming to the fore.
Yeah, and you know, Angie, if I can just build on that very quickly as well, you know, we've had a lot of engagements with our governments in the last couple of months, and in our particular instance, our minister is a woman, and she made such a telling point the other day on another Women's Day interview panel, where she said that she thinks because women are natural caregivers and are naturally the caring gender, that perhaps it's easier for us to expose ourselves to being less about having the answers and more about a caring pathway to finding them. So without necessarily measuring one gender up against the other, I think that through this crisis, there's a lot of pressure on men to always say, yes, I know what's happening. And it's been very interesting to me to watch many of the men in leadership positions around me really struggle because they can't say that. I think women are generally more able to say, well, let's sit down as a bunch of us and figure this out together. And I think that's one of the reasons why possibly around the world we see the countries that have female leadership possibly have done this a little bit better, because I think we as women like to sit down and consult and think about it and analyze and discuss. I mean, we are the gathering gender. We want to gather information. We don't necessarily feel that we have to always say we know exactly what's going to happen and then stick with that, even if that's not the case. And I think it's been an interesting time for women in this whole process as a result of that.
So I'm going to pick up on that comment, Yolan, and I'm going to come to Helen, and perhaps just say, you know, many people say that South African women, in the context that we live with so much diversity and so much challenge and opportunity, have some really unique advantages and characteristics that have seen that. You would agree with that?
Yes, I would agree. I think being a South African woman, we've come from a very complex background politically and in terms of gender equality, particular backgrounds and companies that we all work in, a lot of them have been male dominated for a while. And a South African woman is usually someone with a huge inner strength and a resilience, and also a way to actually just, women are more prone to actually joining together and joining hands in business and making things, being able to reach out to each other, whereas if it's a common story of the man when he's lost, he won't ask for directions, perhaps. But I think women are very good at actually coming together and becoming a team when there's a crisis. So I would say that's really the inner strength of the South African woman, is the ability to confer and never be afraid to own up and say, I'm scared of something, but really to just also face that challenge and get on and find a solution.
So I'm going to turn us to something a little bit more light-hearted now. And Deidre, I think I'll come to you and ask you if you could share an amusing or light-hearted or an anecdote that has happened to you over the past 5 months that when you look back, you're going to have a bit of a giggle.
Well, I think I was already giggling in lockdown, because one of the things that kept us going was a couple of days after lockdown, we initiated a Manzi marathon group. Some people had never run before, but we decided that we were going to do this 42 kilometers over the first 21 days, which we did, but the difference was that we had a theme every day. So we found ourselves running around the garden, which is stupid, feels stupid in the first place. But we were dressed as a cat, as a pregnant schoolgirl, as Captain America. And one of the days was PJ Day. So we had quite a few of the ladies in their very comfortable winter pajamas, etc. But quite a few of the men don't have pajamas. And so we had a few giggles about what we looked like every day, and sometimes with less clothes than more. That kept us going for the first 21 days. And what was also great was that there was a couple of people that hadn't run very far, and it was a great achievement for them to actually do that as well. So yeah, there has been some fun times, and I think that it's just been extraordinary going into this lockdown. And it was always in the shower that I kind of reflected and wondered, how is this real? Are we in a movie? Is this something that's really happening to us? So it took a while for the reality to hit home.
Thanks for that, Deidre. Tanya, I'm going to pose the same question to you. Has there been something amusing that you'd like to share with us that can give us a bit of a giggle?
Yeah, I think if I have to think back, it was certainly something that happened in the first few weeks of lockdown. We decided to start using YouCook in the evenings, because we always need a little bit of a break. You're on a late night call like this, and you don't feel like sorting dinner. And then after a few weeks, my partner and I decided, actually, you know what, the kids need to get involved with this as well. So we got the two 16-year-old boys into the kitchen, handed over the recipe, and said, your problem tonight. And we did give them one piece of advice, which was to read the whole recipe before they started, which of course, being teenage boys, they didn't even attempt to do. And when we came into the kitchen a little while later, they had no idea how to zest a lemon. So the zest of the lemon got chucked in the dustbin, because they didn't realize that further down the recipe, you might need the zest from the lemon before you quartered it. They thought that toss the salad meant toss it in the bin. So it was just hilarious. What we had left to eat was very amusing, but it certainly gave us a good laugh, and it taught them the lesson to maybe read the recipe before you get started.
Oh, goodness. Helen, I'm going to ask the same of you. What has been a more amusing incident that you've experienced? Okay, we've got the universal, you're on mute.
Okay, cool.
There you go.
Muted now. So I think obviously we've worked on our own during lockdown, and one of the things I do is go to the Cederberg and work there. And being on my own, staying on my own, one evening I had an interesting visitor in the cottage I was staying in. And it was a cold night, so I lit a fire in the fireplace, and then underneath the fireplace I saw a movement, and there was this African mouse. So the mouse was in the house and darting across the room, and I tried to get the mouse and put it outside, but there's no way it was going out in the cold and the rain. So in the end, I had to just decide I would stay in with the mouse. and I would go to bed and just hope everything would be fine. But the mouse had other ideas. I closed the doors, thought he was closed out for the night, but in the middle of the night, I felt this little clawing at the back of my back, and then the mouse had joined me in bed. And not content with the fact that I'd locked all the food away in the fridge because he'd been stealing it, I got up in the morning to get my eco coffee cup to take out to work, and the mouse had gnawed all the way through the top. I don't know whether you can see the top here.
Yes.
Yeah, these Cedarburg mice are monster mice, and it had eaten the hot top of the eco cup. So I think that's the funniest incident I've had in lockdown, because this thing just didn't give up. Whatever you tried to do to keep it away, it was determined to stay in the house and make sure that it had something to eat and some warmth. So yeah, that's a small story from the Cedarburg.
Oh dear. And Yolan, how about you?
And I think there's been some very interesting things that have come out of lockdown for me. I think the first thing is most people who know me will know that I live with a menagerie of 12 dogs, don't ask, and a small herd of horses, etc. And the one thing that was the first thing I realized out of lockdown was how many times a day my dogs howl. And they break into song at the most inopportune moments, and all 12 of them surround every part of the property, and they all let it go for a really long time. And they do this about 6 or 7 times a day. And I think that was the one thing that I certainly never realized when I was at the office all day long. The other thing I realized, in the beginning, I think like most people, we all sat with the TV on in the background in the lounge, avidly watching CNN and Al Jazeera and every news channel we could to try and absorb it all. And and over time, I think we realized quite quickly how happy we were to kill all those television connections and actually just stay away from the news and actually be happy to disconnect ourselves from the house. But I do have to say that in the moments when I still found myself interested to find out what was happening on the rest of the world and turned the television on, I will say that I never want to see another insurance ad as long as I live. And that has certainly been one of my take-home messages. And I think Dot Show is coming up close second on that one. So that's definitely something that I've found has been an interesting insight during the lockdown. But as far as a sort of, funny and amusing and embarrassing things goes, I think that, I had one opportunity where my horses were being taken out into the paddock one morning, and I watched my dogs all lining up in a row to chase them by my old lady who can't walk very fast anyway. And I was on the phone to a senior manager in one of our conservation agencies in the country. And I took the phone away from my ear, put it on mute, and proceeded to let the dog have it in non-certain terms, because I've watched him chase her solidly every day now for about a month. And I used every expletive known to mankind and told him how I was sick and tired of him chasing the dog and called him every dreadful name. And then put the phone back to my ear and realized I hadn't put it on mute. I had put it onto loudspeaker. So I was humiliated when there was a dead silence on the other side, and the gentleman I was talking to cleared his throat and said, well, can we continue with our discussion? So I think most of us have had these moments where we thought we were on mute and we weren't, and we thought we were, not on camera and we were. And I think we've all learned how to be very, very careful about the buttons we choose, because our portal to the world are electronic devices, and I think we've all learned to respect them for having a life of their own a lot more than perhaps we used to.
Absolutely. And so what I'm going to mention to the audience, that if anyone would like to pose a live question to the panel, you can use the raise your hand feature and we can give you the opportunity. But while we're waiting to see if there are any additional questions, Eleanor, Mary, really just wanted to touch on one of your points earlier about women being eager to consult, analyze and consider and change course if necessary, rather than making a decision under pressure. And she supports your comments about the countries being led by women have certainly fared better than others in this pandemic. So I just wanted to acknowledge that comment from Eleanor Mary. And perhaps what we'll do now is... Yes.
Yeah, Ange, I'm going to jump in here if you don't mind, because I think earlier on when I was muted, I wanted to just, when I was disconnected rather, I wanted to just make a point to the one of our questions was posed about how nature's had a breather. And there's another aspect to that I think is quite useful to add, and that is that I think never before have our scientists and researchers had an opportunity that they've had now to be able to document things like the freedom and the movement that animals have got when human beings are not moving around, like this sort of the resurgence of certain species in areas that have not been seen before. We've seen, you know, predators in cities. We've seen birds that have never been noticed before coming out. We've seen marine life bounce back, etc. And I wanted to say that as much as that might all revert back to normal when human beings go back to normal, the opportunity has not been lost, because the ability for us to be able to research and document this, I think, is going to help inform decisions and policies, hopefully going forward into the future, because we can say that, you know, this was this is nature given the opportunity to do its own thing. So, for example, around infrastructure build in the future, there's now scientific evidence to prove that if certain infrastructure is done in certain ways and certain types of developments are done in certain ways, that we can still coexist with nature. It hasn't disappeared from our cities. It hasn't disappeared from our gardens. So I don't think it's a window that has been closed. I think the lessons learned will hopefully stand us in good stead going forward into this sort of green build back future that we all want. I think that opportunity will hopefully be with us for many, many years going forward. And there's been quite a lot of research being done on ocean noise, for example. And now the evidence is clear, whereas it was refuted in the past about the impact of ocean noise. And now it's been very, very clear in the absence of ocean noise as to the effects on the movements of marine mammals and marine life, etc. So I think that's going to give us the impetus we need to see policy reform in the future.
And I think that leads us really nicely to talking a little bit about the environment and conservation, and perhaps, you know, to reflect on what ignites each of your passion for the work that you do in the environmental space, in the conservation space, because each one of you, the Cape Leopard Trust and Eskom and Investec, are so entrenched and supportive of the activities that the EWT does, and work with us on so many programs. And perhaps, Tanya, I'll come to you first. You know, what is it that ignites that passion in the work that you do?
Angela, I think for me it really starts with the fact that I was very fortunate to grow up with parents who fell in love with the Kruger long before I was ever even born. So when I gave my dummy away, it was given to a pride of lion outside Chikwani in the Kruger Park. You know, that was my start to life and to nature. So it's in my DNA. It's deeply entrenched in me. And actually, when I was a young teenager, I didn't relish driving around the Kruger Park for hours and hours in the sun and desperately looking for animals. But yet, within a few years, it suddenly, I missed it if I didn't do it. When I was at varsity, I didn't go as often. And I realized how deeply it was in me. So I'm just so extremely grateful that the company I work for has given me a huge opportunity to make such a difference, you know, in a number of areas in terms of wildlife. So we have our Rhino Lifeline program, where we support a number of partners. We've supported EWT's wild dog program. It's deeply entrenched in the Investec DNA. And we're extending that beyond just wildlife protection, looking at how can we actually use our financial architecture to fight illegal wildlife trade. So yeah, for me, I'm extremely passionate about not just the wildlife and not just the areas that we're protecting and the animals we're protecting, but also the communities surrounding it. And I've learned so much about the economy of wildlife and how important the people in the communities surrounding our reserves are to the future functioning of the whole biodiversity circle. So you can see, for me, it is a deeply entrenched passion. And I'm just so excited at the depth that it's going to. Just quickly, something else. Climate change has become a key issue for our stakeholders. And that's exciting for me, because this is no longer just, you know, a CSI project or a little project on the side. This has become critical core stakeholder conversations. You know, it was the first question asked at our AGM. What are we doing around our climate disclosures? And so while this is no longer just an on the nice side thing to have, this is something across the world, doesn't matter where you're situated, everyone needs to start taking into account. Yeah, that's where my passion for nature and conservation comes from.
And we can see that passion very clearly when you're speaking to us, and we appreciate it. And Deidre, I'm going to spotlight to you and really ask you the same. What ignites your passion?
Okay, so I suppose the kind of work that I do with Eskom has two sides to it. And the one side is the tougher side, and that's managing to reduce our emissions and link to the climate change. And more recently, we've been talking about the just transition away from coal and into greener technologies. But on a daily basis, my role is really about making sure that we minimize our impact on the environment, and our activities, just the very nature of our activities, being coal-fired power plants, have a negative impact on the environment. So dealing with that every day is not, it's certainly challenging, and I'm always inspired by it, and I never lose the energy on it. But the integration and conservation issues are the bits and pieces that I can really enjoy. And we've done some amazing work with EWT, you know, from the birds and power line interactions to using dogs with communities, and then setting up nature reserves, and really doing a lot with conservation and making the most of a bad situation, but actually making it something positive and rewarding. So I think I like, personally, what appeals to me is that we can do a bit of greater good, and with a company like Eskom, they as much as they acknowledge the negative impact on the environment, they also allow us to go out and do things that are actually going to add benefit and address the negative environmental impact. So that I think I'm very privileged to be able to have the two sides of it, which is sort of the industrial environmental side, and then also mainstreaming biodiversity into a company such as Eskom. And yeah, that's really inspiring.
And Helen, to you, what ignites you in the environmental space and the conservation space, besides leopards, of course?
Yeah, well, my first introduction to Africa was at the age of 13, when I came over with my family, and my father was involved in the Sishin-Saldanha railway line. And I went to school. I was British, obviously, didn't speak Afrikaans, didn't know anything about South Africa, but I was put into an Afrikaans high school in a very small town, and it was quite a challenge actually to get used to that environment. And obviously I hadn't got any knowledge of the history of South Africa at the time, so not many of the children would speak to me, and I didn't speak the language. And I found solace in nature, because we were on the edge of the Kalahari in a small place called Katu, and what I found best in the afternoon was just to go out into the sand, into the red sand, watch the meerkats, sometimes see a snake or two, use the bush to dodge the teachers when I was supposed to be at home doing homework. So so that was really, you know, the introduction to the big wide open spaces of Africa and the way nature worked, and beginning to respect it. And that came back to me later on when I had the opportunity to come into working with conservation. And I've worked with some incredible people over the last 15 years through my career, including the team at EWT, but also people like Dr. Will Foles and Wilfred Chivel on the marine side, William Foles on the rhino side. And I really enjoy the fact that these people have contributed so much, and each of us play a big part in, or can play a part in, making a difference. And nature for me is, it's a well-oiled machine. It's something that's kind of a Rolls-Royce engine around us with huge power, and our well-being depends on it. And yet, in the economic sense, sometimes people just take it for granted, and at the moment, governments don't see enough relevance in nature. But I see it from my perspective, and from working in conservation, I think the main thing is it's a privilege to be able to serve something as vast as nature. And in my own capacity as the CEO of the Cape Leopard Trust, try and find a way to ensure the long-term survival of the small leopards in the Cape that are very rare, and make that for the benefit of nature and society, because without leopards in the ecosystem in the Western Cape, and obviously biodiversity and the ecosystems are upset, but also Africa would lose, it would be so much poorer without leopards. And so getting people to work alongside wildlife and respect it and value it is really what I find really gives me satisfaction in my job.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And I'm very conscious that we had planned about 45 minutes to an hour for our chat this evening, and we're coming up to the witching hour, I suppose. So I think what I'd like to do is just end with something going back in time. So I'll do the same lineup, and perhaps Tanya, I'll start with you. If you could call yourself in January and give yourself a piece of advice, Tanya, what would that advice to yourself be?
Not really good at ever listening to myself, but if I had to reflect back, we actually had a team offsite at the end of January, and we were all asked to kind of put out what our wish was for the year. And my wish was for less stress, for less pressure, for less rushing around, for less back and forth to the airport. And boy, did I get what I wished for this year. Simplicity. Simplicity was what I wanted, and simplicity is what I got. And I guess now reflecting back, it's actually all about enjoying exactly what I wished for. It's really about enjoying this moment right now and everything about it that I thought I would hate and that I actually love.
Thank you, Tanya. Deidre, we're getting a lot of support for you in the chat group, saying you've really got the most difficult job and you're the best person for the job. So with that, what would you have phoned and said to yourself if you'd called yourself in January?
So yeah, I thought about this a little bit, and I think that I would have prepared with my team a little bit better to say how we would communicate during lockdown and just virtually, because I do think that I would have been able to give them a little bit of better support in terms of how they could deal with it, and then how we could deal with issues together. So I think I would have phoned myself and said, do a little bit more prep and have a chat with each of your team, and just make sure that we're prepared for this long lockdown period. I do think that would have had some advantage. And I would have told myself to go out and buy some more comfortable pants, because I wear my track pants a lot more than my office outfit these days. So I think I would have told myself to go and do a little bit of shopping for comfortable track pants.
Oh my, I think we would have all done that. How about you?
I think I would have said buy more wine. But no, actually, I think I would have probably said to myself, expect the unexpected. I think the weirdest thing I've had to do in the lockdown has been interviewing for a senior staff member on Zoom. And as women, I know Tanya mentioned it a little bit about the socializing and the aspects of watching body language and responses to questions and things like that. And it was incredibly difficult actually being able to interview for a senior position during lockdown and do it all on Zoom electronically and select the people that should be in your top list, and then realizing that actually there's no one in your top list that you selected that did well on Zoom, so you have to go back to the drawing board. So I think expect the unexpected would be what I would have said would be my star sign motto for this year.
Oh, expect the unexpected. Yes, I like that. And Yolan, I'm going to come to you as we're drawing to a close for any closing thoughts or comments you'd like to share.
Thanks, Ange. I think the last point I want to make is really to build on a little bit on what Helen's touched on. I think for the EWT, I think we were well prepared for this insofar as we're already an organization that's very geared towards remote working with partnerships and staff members spread across 13 countries. But I think, and it's been touched on by other panelists, what was quite interesting to me was to see the shift in people who perhaps were your star performers who really struggled in this time, other people who perhaps work in the background who've risen to the forefront and become just incredibly talented in areas you didn't know. So a little bit like Helen said, expect the unexpected, but I think it's don't ever take anything for granted. We all thought this would last 2 or 3 months. And the reality is that we possibly might see the end of this year out before we even get back to a full office type environment again. So I think be prepared for change. Be prepared for change at any given time. Don't underestimate the impact of that change. Be prepared for people who you underestimated for their leadership abilities to rise. Be prepared for the people you leaned on the most to perhaps not be there in the same way you thought they would be. And I think just, it keeps us on our toes as leaders and as human beings, because it's changing environments that really do expose lots and lots of different things that you cannot predict anymore. You cannot rely on making assumptions anymore. But Ange, I know we're running out of time, but I think it would be very remiss of us not to perhaps acknowledge the fact that you are also one of the leading ladies in the country, I think, having been the CEO of the Institute of Directors for many years and played such a key leadership role in business in South Africa. So perhaps before we close, we can just throw one question to you, and that is, do you have any of your personal insights you'd like to share with us? Any funny stories, any interesting insights, any last lessons? I would love to have you be part of this closing with your experience and not just be our interviewer here tonight, because you're also a woman that I look up to extraordinarily and have learned so much from in my life. So I'd love to have you also just throw a few of your personal words out for us this evening.
So thank you, Yolan. You're making me blush a little bit. I've gotten the hang of profiling and spotlighting everybody else's videos, but I'm not sure I know how to do my own. So I hope that you can see me. And for me, it's really been about what I've had to learn is about balancing my time, because when we started this lockdown, it was very much a case of it's go, 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 and nothing can change, and we can't dip our productivity, and we need to be,
I think Angela's frozen.
Hi everyone. Yes, Angela is frozen, and I've just received a message from Tanya that she's got load shedding now. So I think we.
And I thought it was me, and I'm still online. That's so funny.
Am I back?
You're there, Ange. Thank goodness.
Okay, there's Ange. We can see her now.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, indeed, we can.
Ange, are you there? I think we've lost Angela, everyone.
I think so.
Tammy, I don't know if you can still hear me.
I'm not sure if everybody can hear me. My power's off, so I've lost connection. I've tried to hotspot onto my my phone, and I apologies if it's disrupted our conversation. But what I was really saying is I've really had to learn about balance, and I know we talk about balance, and we've tried to do it over the years, but it spotlighted that I needed to focus my attention on balance and not try and achieve too much because of the unusual circumstances.
Yeah, that's good. Can I give a special quote before we go?
Yes, Helen, please do.
It's from Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know whether any of you know the book she wrote, Eat, Pray, Love.
Yes.
Anyway, she had a quote for Women's Day, and it said, the women that she loves and admires for their strength and grace did not get that way because shit worked out. They got that way because shit went wrong and they handled it in 1,000 ways and on 1,000 days. But so that's a kind of closing lockdown quote from me.
That's very, very apt.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Thanks very much to the panelists, and thank you to everyone that attended. It was a fantastic chat. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for the opportunity. Night.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Night, guys. Thanks very much.
Bye.